I don't know about you, but I need that song now, maybe more than I ever have. It is well with my soul. This pandemic has gone on for far longer than we thought it would. And we're seeing the effects in our society. Tensions are rising between political parties, between family members, between workers and expectations. Anxiety is running high, and it manifests itself in all kinds of ways, and frustrations and feelings, and so we need some peace in this time. And I always come back to that song because it reminds me God is still there, and in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the uncertainty that I don't know what is happening next, God's still at work. It might not be what I expect, but God's still there. And so I need that reminder, and I hope you do too. I hope you will hear that word, that God is still at work, even in the middle of all this. What we're in right now is there's a word for it. It's called a liminal space, a space between. And so liminal is a Latin word. It comes from the Latin root that means threshold, like in a doorway between two places. The liminal space is this crossing over space where you've left something behind, but you're not yet fully into something else. It's this transition space between, and that's where we are. We thought that all this would be over in just a little while, and we could get back to normal, some kind of normal, and it's gone on for so long, and it seems to have gotten worse in many ways, and so normal now looks even further off than it did at the beginning of all this. And so that puts us deeper into that liminal space between. We left behind the way things were, and we're not yet into what they're going to become. And so what do we do with this ambiguous space in which we find ourselves? And that's, at least gives us a label for what we have. And you can look for ways to make it through this time. You think about other things that you've gone through, and it can be a useful thing to think back. How was God present? How, could you see God in the middle of that, or not? But how did it? Looking back, how do you see God at work in those times? I on my desk, I keep this pile of rocks, and you may not remember, but one of the first sermons I preached here, during the sermon, I said, well, this is something that they did in the story of Joshua, and I think I'm going to ask you to do the same thing today. That's what I said during the sermon. And so in that story, there's a bit of a liminal space between. You had the Israelites left slavery, and they're headed to this new life in the Promised Land, and they kept forgetting. They forgot where they came from. They forgot how they're supposed to be following God and doing what God said as interpreted through Moses. They kept forgetting. And so when they reached the threshold, reached the crossing, when they reached the Jordan River, it really was a liminal space, and Joshua said, we're not going to forget where we've been. We're going to remember this. And so he instructed each of the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, to get a stone and to pile them up, a large stone on the edge of the river, as a monument to where they'd been and to what God had done for them. And so they wouldn't forget as they headed into that new space where they didn't know what was going to happen next. Now they have this monument to what God had already done, to give them confidence about what God could do and to what happened next. And so during that sermon, I passed out these rocks and some Sharpies, and I had you write on it some way that God has been faithful to you. So as we sit here by the Jordan River in the middle of not knowing what's going to happen next, as we sit in this liminal space, maybe that's one thing you can do. Get a rock. Get a bunch of rocks and start thinking of ways God has been faithful to you in the past. And who knows what'll start piling up. Look at this testimony. This is what you did in church a few years ago. This is how God has been faithful. I keep this on my desk to remind me in these times. I challenge you to do this. Again, we all need ways to help us cope, to get through this, and music has been there for me. If you haven't noticed, I'm playing the guitar a whole lot more, and I had to turn the news off and pick up my guitar and learn some new ways to play hymns and to just really get beyond myself a little bit and into the music. I feel like that's a connection between me and God, and that gives me it's a bridge between who I was and who I'm becoming. I've played guitar for a long time, but I'm learning new things, and so it helps me get through this liminal space. And so I want to challenge you to find something to help you mark this space and where we're at. And so, we need a little confidence. We need a little monument to God's faithfulness. And may we head into the unknown without so much fear. May we be reminded of the words that Jesus spoke to the disciples in the boat as they were crossing the Sea of Galilee and a storm arose and they feared for their lives. He said, "It is I. Do not be afraid." The words "do not be afraid" appear in Scripture at least 75 times. I looked it up once. I think that's right. Jesus says it on numerous occasions. He comes and he speaks into that fear. He says, "It is I. Don't be afraid." Jesus is with us in the midst of this in-between space in which we now inhabit, and he's going to walk with us into what's next. We can't see it, but Jesus is right here with us saying, "It is I. Do not be afraid." So walk away from this space with a little more peace, knowing that Jesus is walking beside you. And maybe if you can build a monument to God's faithfulness, it'll make that next challenge and that next step a little bit easier. Go with God, my friends.